This mower was found by using a free website, but after picking it up, I wasn't sure why they even gave it away. But after looking at it for a minute, I'm getting the idea that they thought this mower was on its last leg. Well, I guess the one thing left to do is to try and get it running and hopefully prove them wrong. Unfortunately, things don't always go to plan, and this one is gonna fight back. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt lawnmower, and the problem is that when pulling on the rope, the engine wants to pull it right back out of your hands. Now the weird part is that it only does it when there's fuel in the carb. It will not do it if the fuel system is empty like it is right now. But if I put some fuel into the carb's throat and pull on the rope, that's when it happens. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Now, some of you that are watching might already realize what the problem is, and more than likely, it's a partially sheared flywheel key. But why would that affect the pull rope? Well, the timing of the ignition is based on where the magnets are on the flywheel in relation to the crank and the position of the piston. And when the key is sheared, the timing of the spark is going to happen a lot sooner than it's supposed to, and that causes the piston to be pushed back by the combustion while the piston is nowhere near the top of its travel. Think of it this way: you shot off your fireworks 3 days before you should have, and now the law is here wanting someone to answer for it. Of course, if you saw the last video on this mower, having a pull rope pull back out of your hands wasn't the only issue this mower had. Now the reason this is important is that I'm trying to understand why this mower was given away. Was it because it had too many issues, or did they just give up on gasoline and moved over to a different type of lawn equipment? Now the oil doesn't look that bad, and it was at the correct level, which means someone was taking care of it. But if that's the case, then why did they get rid of it? Now after looking in the fuel tank, there wasn't any fuel in it, so I'll have to remove the air filter and put some into the carb and then try and start it. That way you can see the issue it's having. Now on the first pull, the rope stopped about halfway of its normal travel. After that though, it gets better, and by the third pull, it's back to normal. Now it gets easier as you pull it more because the fuel that we put into the carb is now gone. This proves that the flywheel key is sheared, and we'll need to fix it if we want this mower to start the way it's supposed to. Now another one of my pet peeves is when the pull rope guide is put on facing down instead of up. And the reason why is because it'll cause the rope to make contact with the handle, which doesn't sound that bad, except it could lead to premature wear on the rope and could cause it to break sooner than it should. And as you can see, the rope no longer makes contact with the handle, and all is well back in the universe. We can now go back to inspecting the flywheel key, which means we need to remove the plastic cover on top of the engine and then remove the blower housing, which also holds the recoil assembly. Now once the fuel tank is moved out of the way, we can now see the electric starter for the engine, which hopefully still works because I do have plans on getting the key start to work again. Like I've said before, we can't all be 25 forever, and at some point you're going to need some help down the road. Now from what I can tell, I think the battery is dead, and the worst part is that I can't even charge it since it didn't come with one. However, if you've been watching for a while, you might already know what I have planned to get around this annoying issue. I'll more than likely replace the battery with one from a power tool rated at a higher voltage, but why not just replace the battery with one that's supposed to be in there? The answer is simple: I don't like being robbed. The price for the replacement battery is over $100. Yes, you heard me, one bill for a tiny 12-volt battery. Of course, that is an OEM part, and more than likely I'll choose to go with a cheaper universal battery, but I would still need to get a charger, which is also $50. So how much is my plan going to cost then? Well, I'll tell you one thing, it won't be $150. Instead, it should cost less than $20, which is a whole lot easier to afford. Now, if you thought the battery was expensive, I haven't told you how much the starter is. The starter is almost $150 by itself. Even if this engine was damaged internally, I could still make more money than if the mower was working by selling this mower piece by piece. In fact, used starters go for around $45 as well as the flywheel, and the biggest ticket item is the transmission, which if bought new would be over $160, which means I'd sell this one for half that price. It's a real shame that we've gotten to the point that these mowers are worth more as parts than a working machine. Now, while I was giving this engine a quick wash to get rid of any dirt and oil, I noticed that the air vane for the choke flap seemed a bit tight. Now at first I thought it was stuck, but after giving it a slight push, I can see that it's not stuck, but it is moving a bit slower than it should be. Unfortunately, this is not a good sign. It means that fuel was left in the system, and on top of that, the carb was also leaking fuel as well. It also means that this carb is definitely going to be a pain to clean, and that it could cause more problems for us later on. Unfortunately, there's still more bad news. Now, most times you can easily remove a flywheel when the key is not sheared, but once it gets sheared, well, it becomes a lot tougher to remove. So what you're looking at is the keyway in the crankshaft, and it should be lined up with a slot in the flywheel, but it's pretty easy to tell they are not lined up. To help out with a visual, the screwdrivers should be lined up with each other, but as you can see, they are not. Of course, to fix this, we'll need to remove the flywheel, but there's a problem. Now, some prefer to remove the flywheel by striking the crankshaft while putting upward force on the flywheel, but that's a lot harder to do when the key is damaged. So to make it a lot easier to remove, I would always recommend using some sort of a puller. Fortunately, I was able to fix that arm that broke on mine in the last video. So here's the damaged key from the engine, and it's pretty severe. With the key offset like this, it would have caused the ignition timing to advance, and that's the reason why the pull rope was being yanked back by the engine. Fortunately, I learned my lesson from the last mower that had this issue, so I already had a bag of keys ready, so this will be a quick and simple fix. I'll just install the flywheel first, making sure to line up the keyway, then install a key, and then tap it into place. Now there are a few different ways to do this. You don't have to do it this way, so if you do it a different way, good for you then. Now once the flywheel and the starter cup have been installed onto the engine, I'll then move on to something that I'm really not looking forward to, which is the carb. Okay, so here's the deal. If I was working on this repair at my shop and I knew that the carb was in really rough shape, I would immediately write a ticket to remove and replace the carb and walk over to the parts counter and get a new one. And the reason why is very simple: time and convenience. Now taking this carb apart just to clean it and then hoping that it works is very risky, and that's because if it doesn't work, you just lost time that you could have put towards a different machine. Of course, I don't work in a shop like that, and no one is paying me by the hour to do this repair, so that means I have the luxury of time. However, that means I have to be my own supervisor and account manager, and those two are always fighting it out between just replacing the carb or just cleaning it and servicing it. So here is the choke flap, and it looks like old gummy gasoline is interfering with this part of the post that goes into the carb. And if that wasn't bad enough, it looks like the governor flap is also having the same issue, except this one is stuck and won't budge. Now that shouldn't be a problem that a little bit of carb spray can't handle, but I'll do that once I get the carb apart. And almost immediately I'm hit with a gummed up fuel jet, which can only mean one thing: what's inside this bowl is not going to look any better. So as you can see, this carb is in pretty rough shape, but it's not terrible and it makes you think that you can save it. However, it's just a trap. Now looking at it from the side, you can see that the float is resting in a position that's not parallel with the bowl's mounting surface. This means the needle seat, which helps to regulate fuel flow and ultimately is responsible for shutting off the fuel into the carb, has swollen up and needs to be replaced, otherwise you're going to have a really bad day. So here's the problem: I can either spend the next 30 minutes cleaning this carb, or I can put those 30 minutes into something else. And in exchange, I just have to pay $10 and wait a day or two for it to arrive in the mail, or I can roll the dice and bet that I can save this carb with a half can of carb spray, some compressed air, and a piece of wire. Of course, since I'm a card-carrying cheapskate, I'm going to try and save it, but I'm also painfully aware that my chances are very low on saving this carb. That means what I'm doing is potentially wasting my carb cleaner, a new needle seat, and more importantly my time, which is something you can never get back. Now after a long uphill battle trying to clean this nasty carb the best I can, I'm now ready to remove that needle seat. Unfortunately, I don't have the right tool to remove it, but most of the time I basically destroy it anyway taking it out. However, I might have to consider getting one. Now I did use compressed air to blow out any of the remaining bits of the seat, so I am confident that I got all of it out. After dropping in the new seat and making sure that the smooth side of the seat is facing out of the carb, I then used the back of a drill bit to press it in. And after replacing the needle, float, and pin, you can now see how the float is supposed to look in relation to the rest of the carb. After that, I just need to clear all the openings in the fuel jet and finish it off with some carb spray, then I'll be ready to put the bowl back on. Now I didn't time myself cleaning this carb, and film time is not a good gauge to let you know what the real time was either, but my best guess as to how much time I spent servicing and cleaning this carb would be at least 30 minutes. Now someone might ask,
is spending 30 minutes with some carb cleaner and a $3 seat worth it to save $10 for a new carb?
And I hate to tell you what my answer is. It really depends on the condition of each carb. Now this one was pretty bad. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being broken beyond repair and 10 being almost pristine, this one was a 4, which is quite low. And based on this scale, this carb should have been thrown into a bucket of used carbs to be cleaned at a later time when there's really nothing else to repair. It's basically work that should be done during the wintertime. There's also one more problem with this kind of extensive work done on a carb, which is the potential for a fuel leak. So if you take a carb apart that was not leaking before and mess with the needle, float, or seat, there's now a slim chance that a leak is possible. It's not a high chance, but it has increased some. So before I finish installing everything back onto the engine, I do want to put a small amount of fuel into the tank to see if the carb is going to leak. And if you're asking about how much fuel I'm talking about, I would say that a quarter tank should be enough. Now this could take 30 seconds to find out or a few minutes, so I'd walk off for a bit and do something useful, otherwise you can stare at it for a good while. Now I walked off for about 5 minutes and luckily this one is not leaking, which is pretty good considering my percentage for having a leaking carb after doing this service is a lot higher than I'd like to admit. Unfortunately, I already took the mower off the table before realizing that I forgot to put the blade back on. Now as a reminder, unless you have a special type of mower, most mowers must have the blade attached to the engine to run correctly, otherwise when you pull on the rope, you're going to realize something's really wrong. So it took a few pulls before the engine started, but unfortunately it stopped, which is not very promising at all. I'll try that again and hopefully it'll do better on the second attempt. So luckily this time it only took the one pull to get it to start, and although it was smoking like a freight train, it soon cleared up. It would also seem that the self-propel is working, however I might need to look at it again just to make sure there's not about 15 years worth of grass clippings interfering with the pulleys. Now I do want to try and start it again while the engine is still hot, otherwise we might have more problems here. Unfortunately it's not wanting to start, which is not good news. Now some of you might be saying,
Oh, you need to change your spark plug or your ignition coil is failing since you can't get it to start when it's hot.
Now you might be right, but an easy test is to put some fuel into the carb's throat and see if it'll start and run again. So it looks as though it's a fuel related issue, which only makes sense. I mean, we did have to service a really bad looking carb. However, it got a lot worse once off camera. Eventually, it would only start and run, but it wouldn't stay running for long. So here's where things get really tough, and of course I'm talking about how I'm going to repair it. There's the obvious choice of just ordering a new carb. I could also waste my precious time cleaning the old carb again, or I could get one of those ultrasonic cleaners and let it do all the hard work. Which of course leads me to ask you, what do you think I should do to fix this mower? Should I give it another cleaning or make a different choice this time? I don't have an issue with any of the choices I've already talked about, but I'd rather hear what your opinions are than my own. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.